Okay, thank you for being here. This is the NKBA. You are here for our very first webinar of the month of June for designing and marketing with color. We want to thank Kohler for their generous sponsorship for the month of June for all of our webinars. Today's session is called Design Trends, How Emerging Insights Impact Color, Material, and Finish Trends. And Betsy Froelich, who's a senior channel manager with Kohler Company, is here with us today. So I'd like to welcome her and thank you all for being here. And Betsy, if you're ready, we're ready to get started. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Debbie. Can you still hear me okay?
Just wonderful. Very good.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with everyone, and we are thrilled to sponsor the webinar series for the month of June. And we're thrilled to kick it off with a conversation about design trends and specifically how emerging insights impact color, material, and finish trends. I think this is an interesting way to start your month of color marketing, because it'll take you a little bit behind the scenes into some of the insights that are impacting some of the CMF or color material finish trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. And I think we'll give you some good insights to talk about with your clients. And one thing I will mention that Debbie and I spoke about yesterday is that we are happy to answer questions that you might have as we're going through this. Because we're recording it, if you could send your questions via the chat functionality to Debbie, we will go through and answer all of those questions at the end. Now, we're going to start the conversation about color material finish trends and insights with a conversation about cultural dynamics. And this is the start of what will go into the insights section. So traditionally, culture is referred to as a pattern that signifies some sort of human activity manifested by the arts, music, sculpture, theater, dance, like food. I could go on and on. In more recent years, it also has included pop culture, which could include things like the internet and entertainment, and really helps to organize complex ways of living, value systems, traditions, etc. And what we'll talk about today are some of those dynamics that are impacting how we live and how we work together. We're going to go through a few big buckets of cultural dynamics and ideas, but what I want to start with are two of my favorite underlying sort of dynamics or trends that are impacting how we live and work together. And the first is this idea of a visual culture. I would imagine that the vast majority of you communicate visually quite often. I bet that you ask your clients for images when you're trying to understand what their style is. I bet you use social media platforms like Instagram or Pinterest to communicate out and market your firm as well. The human brain processes images 60,000 times faster than it does words, so it's no wonder that we're evolving in this way. I know we in marketing talk a lot about thumb stopping power on Instagram and what is going to have the power to have someone stop their thumb and give a little double tap and like something that we have out there. And we will only continue to communicate more visually with each other. And really, I think that helps lead to a common understanding of what each person is looking for. The second underlying dynamic is the idea that attention is the new currency. And this is one of my favorite fun facts that our insights team has provided to us, is that since the year 2000, the human attention span has dropped from 12 seconds to 8 seconds, which is less than that of a goldfish. You heard me correctly. The human attention span is now less than that of a goldfish. And that has some really interesting implications. How do we capture clients' attention? How do you get them to pay attention through the important decisions that you need them to make? Now, the interesting and contradictory flip side to that is that people have the ability to pay attention, How many people sit and binge watch Netflix shows on the weekend? If it weren't for my three little kids, I probably would be doing that. But people, my point is that people have the ability to pay attention to things if it's something that's interesting to them being presented in a way that they're engaged with. And that has important ramifications for all of us in business. So with those two ideas in mind, we are going to move into some of the other dynamics that we will be talking about. Now, first is this idea of wanderlust, and the idea that travel is a huge impact and inspiration for people in their lives. It's an incredible driver of interior design and product design. And this is backed up by a lot of the research that our insights team has done with consumers across North America about what are some of the important things that are impacting their design decisions. And we know that travel in particular impacts bathroom design because people travel, they stay in hotels, they are exposed to new things like intelligent toilets or cleansing seats, and then they're more comfortable bringing that back with them to their house. Other ways that travel and this idea of wanderlust impact design are certainly with some color material finish trends that we'll talk about in a little bit. The next big dynamic is this idea of clean. And when we talk about clean, we're referencing a hierarchy of needs. And at the base level, that means that people want their spaces to be clean and free from germs, sort of personal care. You want your space to look and feel clean. However, there's a higher order clean where the design of a space can have an impact on someone's mental well-being. And I think that that whole conversation about mental health and how design can play a role in it is an important one to have. And it can be something as simple as having fewer things filling our spaces. And an example of that in a bathroom space could be having a really functional vanity solution so that someone can get their clutter off the counter and have a clean look when they're looking around spaces. I should still mention though that physical clean is important. We know based from our insights team that over half of the people in North America count themselves as germaphobes. And they are constantly using Lysol wipes, hand sanitizer, something like that. And I think a fairly common universal truth is that everyone hates cleaning toilets. So having colors, materials, finishes that look and help people feel clean is really important, as is the overarching product design that goes into products. All right. Moving on from clean, we're going to go to this idea of household formation as another insight that is impacting how people are using color materials and finishes in different ways in their spaces. In general, and this shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people, consumers are taking a less predictable route to home ownership. And once they get there, they're using their homes in different ways. There's some really interesting stats to go along with this. 51% of millennials are parents, but the vast majority of them actually don't believe in marriage, and they'll have significant others, family members, a variety of people living with them to help rear their children. Less than half of kids in America today live with married heterosexual parents. Men are taking on more responsibility for things like child rearing, cooking, and cleaning than they have in past generations. And I share these stats not to comment at all on what is right, wrong, different. It's just to say that these things are happening. And with those changes happening in how people are using their homes, the design of the spaces will have to evolve with them. And a good example of that is what used to be delineated as masculine or feminine spaces just isn't the same anymore. You're seeing much more use of more masculine colors in places like kitchens or other living spaces because of the people who are using those spaces. Moving on from the idea of household formation is this idea of a tech tightrope. So, technology, something that's in our lives every day. The faster and faster evolution of technology does not come without consequences. And some would argue that it's become sort of a modern addiction, invading all aspects of life. But there are a lot of positives that go along with that. People can understand the benefits that technology brings, but there is sort of an inner struggle on how to reap the rewards without the pressure of constantly being on. And we have some examples from our insights team about some of that push and pull. So 59% of Americans say that they're optimistic about the coming technological and scientific changes, and they think that they'll make the future better. But 61% agree that it's becoming more and more difficult to find peace and quiet in life. And about 44% of Americans say they want more performance or technology in the next place they live. So you can see very much that yin and yang about what people are looking for. Another fun fact, the average North American consumer checks their phone about 150 times per day. I bet some of you are actually doing that right now. Now, 60% of Americans say they could not get by without their phone. And to be honest, I've never met the 34% who say that they could. And 53% of Americans, though, say it's important to be able to disconnect from their phones at various times. You're also seeing a rise in things like adult coloring books and knitting and ways that people can disconnect and find pleasure in things that aren't just their telephone. We're also seeing the rise of things like spas that offer digital detox solutions for them, for consumers. You can go, you check in your technology, and you're able to get it back when you leave. And the desire is just to break away from the technology that you're bound to most of the time. And I think what you'll see from a color material finish standpoint as we work with this tech tightrope is the inclusion of technology into products that allow people to express themselves however they want. You know, if someone wants to incorporate technology into their house, you would never want to have them compromise on finish or color selections, etc. Now we have the idea of treat yourself. And one of our first iterations of this was actually treat yourself. And I think it's more fun, but as we went through copywriting, we ended with treat yourself. And this is really about the idea of living in the moment. And if we think about a lot of the pressures of life today and the way society is changing, more and more people are feeling that you have to live in the moment now. It's not about waiting until tomorrow or next year. And so you are willing to invest your money and your time in things that matter to you. Luckily for all of us, you know, the home, the bathroom, the kitchen are places that people are willing to spend more money to design them the way that they would like to be designed. They're willing to invest in the right materials, the best technology, and the best of design. Again, going back to some of the research from our insights team, 76% of people say that their goal is to make their bathroom more luxurious with every product they choose, and that's actually up from 69% in 2012. And I'm guessing none of you will be surprised at what consumers want their bathroom to feel like, but it's a spa. They want the spa-like feeling in their bathroom, and they care about everything down to the detail of their toilet trip lever, the flush handle on their toilet, and every detail in between with things like nice towels, a feeling of warmth, the scents. And I do think the interesting stat is that 62% of Americans actually care about the finish on their toilet, the finish of their toilet trip lever. So after we've treated ourselves and we've thought about all of the other implications and cultural dynamics that we've discussed so far, we have this idea of best of both worlds. And this can apply to a variety of colors, materials, and finishes that we'll talk about, but it could apply to a lot of different kitchen and bath product trends. Apron front sinks is one that comes to mind. And it's this idea that there is in the midst of this, tech tightrope that we're watching or that we're walking and the changing roles in society, there's sort of this natural reaction to yearn for what was perceived as a simpler time. So you want the best of both worlds. You want to be able to have the nostalgia of the past while taking advantage of the technology and the developments of our current place in society. Then we'll wrap up the dynamics with this idea of a modern momentum. So in many ways, it's the culmination of all of the dynamics that we've discussed and how they all fit together. It's a convergence that's sort of a sweet spot about the way trends influence how we think about the future. And when we talk about modern momentum, I want to be clear that modern momentum doesn't just mean contemporary design. It doesn't just mean minimal. It means a fresh thinking, sort of an expectance of the newest, the latest, the best, all layered with beauty and brought to life in a way that you want. We do know, and as I'm sure all of you know, that there is a trend towards more contemporary design, but that doesn't mean that there aren't still a lot of people interested in traditionally appointed details in spaces. But they might want that toilet that's traditionally designed or that faucet that's traditionally designed to have the latest and greatest functionality inside of it. And what that leads us to is a perspective that we've been talking about this year, this idea of what we call the spectrum of modernism, and really asking what kind of modernist are you? And it's placing it on a scale, placing your style or the style of your clients on a scale from minimalist up to maximalist. And think about this in terms of fashion, where there could be a wide range of places that people could fall on the spectrum that are all relevant to today. Calvin Klein and the very minimalist looks that come out of that house would definitely be more on that minimalist end of things, where Dolce and Gabbana on the maximalist side are also very relevant. There's something that's fresh and relevant about both of those perspectives and everything in between. And our point when talking about this is that there's nothing that's right or wrong about it. It's just about choosing the point on here that your clients are comfortable with and that you're comfortable with, and helping them express it in the right way. The great sort of end result of this is that there is a wide universe of choice. Sometimes that choice can be overwhelming, but by pinning it down to a spot on the spectrum, you can really help bring that idea to life. Here are some examples of, again, how that spectrum of modernism can come to life. You have the more geometric, all the way on the minimalism side of things, up to more maximalism, where you see lots of pattern and texture and color combinations. So how do all of these trends and insights that we've just discussed manifest themselves in the color, material, and finish trends that we've been seeing in the world today? So we'll get into some of these different trends that are a manifestation of what we've discussed with the insights. We're going to start with this idea of nuanced neutrals. So we ended our insight section talking about the idea of modern momentum. And while that doesn't mean strictly contemporary design, as I mentioned, we do know that there's been a significant increase in people wanting clean lines and a cool, more minimal aesthetic. You're seeing the introduction of things like nuanced neutrals, which would be more muted taupes and almonds, that can help add some softness to the more contemporary design. There's a gentle warmth that's associated with these colors, And they make you feel more restored and in balance when you walk into some of these spaces, which is incredibly important when we think about the fast-paced, technology-packed world we live in. As you all know, it's not just about using one tone everywhere necessarily, but using a combination of tone on tone to give depth to these spaces and add that comfortable warmth. So these are some visuals of how that comes to life. Here are some other examples of how that can come to life in a bathroom or even a food setting. Now we'll move on to the idea of blanched pastels. And these colors used to be relegated to a nursery, but you're definitely seeing them more now in living spaces and spaces where kids aren't present at all, present or prevalent at all. And it really has to do with what we would articulate as the prevalence of the spectrum of modernism, where you all are helping your clients feel comfortable about choosing colors that make them happy and that fit together in a space wherever they would like it to. Now, here are a couple of examples of that. And again, I think the example on the left-hand side of this powder room is a really interesting one where you can have blanched pastels come to life in a really beautiful sort of dramatic way that doesn't at all look like a little girl's nursery, for example. And that's some beautiful, hopefully you can see it on the screen, but that's actual beautiful de Gournay wallpaper that has sort of a metallic edge to the color. And here's how this could come to life in kitchens in a slightly more purple or more regal way. We're definitely seeing an increase in people using color in the kitchens. Light blues seem to be something that's coming, or grays, and people just really adding a sort of a level of color or warmth to their kitchen spaces, and specifically the cabinetry that's in it. Now we'll actually move into some examples of white and some of the white trends that are happening right now into blacks and whites. So the first one that we will talk about is the idea of vintage white. And this is, as you all know, whites have been around for a very long time. There's always some version of white that's on trend. And really that's because it's the ultimate palette to our lives. You can paint your own individuality against a white space. And this specific vintage white interpretation is about layering softer whites against each other with texture, depth, and different materials to give you this vintage effect. And it's an example of a couple of different trends coming to life. I'd say the best of both worlds, where people are comfortable bringing vintage or historic references into a space by adding a lot of sort of grit to it. You also can see sort of the industrial feel coming to life in this trend as well. I personally love the idea of vintage white and how it can come to life in many different spaces, from kitchens to bathrooms to bedrooms. Now, the next idea that we are going to go into is another interpretation of black and white, taking sort of the vintage white effect and turning it into chalk and charcoal. And this has to do with the warming up of blacks and whites. And again, we think that that's having to do with the fact that people are taking more of the contemporary design and starting to warm it up. This is a really classic color combination that has just sort of softened over time, and it allows you to have a luxurious sort of textured application of black and white. And we really saw this come through the use of plaster and some home furnishings coming in from Europe. That's how we saw the softening sort of start. And it's actually been continued and driven by things even like automobiles and matte black cars that people are interested in. And we really see this trend continuing, and that trend, and part of the reason we can say that is by looking at all of those different reference points like automotives, like interior furnishings, like fashion, and how they all come together. And that can help give us an idea of how long trends will last. Some other examples of classic chalk and charcoal or black and white and how that can come to life. Again, here as well, and you'll see, hopefully through the images that have been selected, that there is a range of more traditional to more contemporary spaces that all of these really apply to. Now we are going to move into our second black and white discussion of trends, and this is taking sort of the opposite direction of chalk and charcoal with oyster and oil. And it is basically taking black and white and adding a pearlescent quality to it, or an opalescent quality that really gives off a shimmer and adds a sense of luxury into black and white design. Excuse me. And it's about the high gloss. You're seeing this especially when it comes to tile incorporated into a variety of spaces, but you're seeing it come through in appliances as well. I think that Aga range that's on the left-hand side is a really great example of it. Again, comes to life differently in a variety of bathrooms and kitchens, but you can really see that opalescent quality coming through the material selections that are made. Now, the next few trends we're actually going to talk about will bring in more of some masculine notes to the color, material, finish palette. As we discussed with some of the insights, men are inhabiting different parts of the home that they used to, like the kitchen. And what is happening is you're seeing an increase in the use of masculine colors and finishes, which is really adding something interesting to design. As sort of another note about why these colors are coming into the kitchen in particular, we've seen over the past 10 years or so a significant increase in the rise of chef competitions on TV, which I'm sure, again, all of you have seen. And that introduction and the use of men on a lot of those shows has really started to increase the masculine notes that we see happening in design from a kitchen perspective. And I think it's just interesting to point out how those things sort of converge together into color, material, and finish trends. So again, it can hopefully help you when you're communicating to your clients, talk about why some of these things are happening. So the first one that we're going to talk about here is oxidized silver. So it's a cool dark dimensional that can, as I mentioned, add a masculine note to a space and just add some rugged texture. You sort of get that textural look by looking at the faucet on the left-hand side. And it very much also brings in a nod to the industrial look, which again is sort of that best of both worlds and harkening back to those old factories that used to exist, and bringing those spaces up to date and making them relevant to today is something that oxidized silver really plays right into. A wood trend that we see this happening with is the idea of winter woods, and that is what we would call a modern twist on sort of the classic whitewashed wood. There are light grays that are being layered over that. And again, this is adding a more masculine and a more contemporary feel to wood trends that we're seeing. Here's how this can come to life in both a vanity as well as a shower situation. Now, the next wood trend that we're going to talk about is the idea of autumn colors or finishes. And that's really just adding amber and truffle undertones. And this really adds a sense of sophistication and warmth to a space, again, in a more masculine way. And here's some examples of how that can come to life in a kitchen. And now we're going to move into some finish trends that we're seeing. And brass and bronze should be of no surprise to anyone that they're showing up in this report. There is a widespread desire for these finishes, and this is coming from a couple of the different insights that we talked about. And because of that, we don't anticipate that these trends will be going away anytime soon. We think that these will continue and continue to grow. These happen for a couple of different reasons. So first is that there is a reaction to the more contemporary design that's happening. You know, as I've said, people are wanting to warm up some of those contemporary spaces, and by adding an element of brass or bronze to white or clean lines, you really get that. You add just a sense of warmth to it. Another reason is that people are wanting to, going back to the best of both worlds, again, incorporate materials that you've seen in different times and different generations. And they're doing it in now new and interesting ways. You might take some brass or something that is reminiscent of tools that were used generations ago and add that sort of finish to cabinet poles, or add it to a faucet or to some lighting. It adds a subtle nod to some sort of historical reference point in a way that is interesting and relevant to today. Here's some examples of how this can come to life in a wide variety of areas. The image on the left is a restaurant that's actually overlooking Lambeau Field here in Wisconsin. But it's interesting how these finish trends have made their way and arguably started in some more hospitality type environments as they make their way into the home. I think this is a really interesting application of the brass and bronze idea in that you see it being used on the trim here. I think as this trend continues to evolve, we'll see more and more opportunities for people to use it in interesting and different places, which is very much what we're seeing with copper. So copper, again, is something that will seem right and relevant and like something you're used to in your markets. And we've seen it for a while in both commercial and residential uses. I think the most popular way that copper, or the most common way copper became popular, was through the use of Moscow mules and people wanting to drink out of those copper mugs. I wish I liked that drink, but I do like the mug that it's served in. Again, what's interesting here, though, is not just that copper is being used, but that it's being used in interesting ways. We're actually starting to see more copper grout options and more metallic grout options that I think bring an interesting twist to tile. So we expect to see copper continue to be experimented with as we move into the next few years. Now we're going to pause and pivot for a minute into some of the CMF trends that we would say are coming more from this idea of wanderlust. The first is the idea of Scottish Isles, and we don't have hours and hours today, but if we did and we could spend some more time talking about insights, one of the other insights that we'd talk about is how people want to bring the outdoors in. And there is this convergence of indoor and outdoor spaces and how you can make them work together. And so this idea of Scottish Isles really exemplifies both people's want to travel as well as their want to bring the outdoors in. So you're seeing some mossy greens, peaty browns that are really good colors to use when you want to incorporate the outside into your indoor space. And really that sort of return to a type of earthen luxury almost promotes a sense of well-being that influences even the building material choices that people are choosing. You can really understand how sustainability and choosing products that not only match this colorway, but also are good for the environment can be selected when this is one of the inspirations. Here's some examples of how those colors can come to life in different settings, both in interiors as well as fashion. And here again, some additional examples of how some of those Scottish Isles colors can be incorporated into design. And what I think is the other important color material finish sort of note about this is that it isn't just the use of one color or one finish. It's about the combination of all of those colors and how they come together, as well as the textures associated with it. You're seeing uses of velvet in really interesting places, and velvet and wood combinations. And those all have to do with the insights as well as the places on from which these trends are coming. Now, this idea of sultry spices, I love this one. It's really about taking some of the colors that come to life from Middle Eastern or Indian food that are becoming really relevant in color palettes. So if you think about just some of the spices that you would see or eat in those locations, you have saffron that can really create a great orange or yellow color, caraway, where there's a deep yellow, turmeric for mid yellow or orange, and then chili for that red. You can see how the literal palette of places can come to life through various colors into and make their way into homes. So it should be of no surprise that, as we said earlier, wanderlust is a really important travel or really important influence when it comes to color material finishes. And in particular, we see that this sort of Middle Eastern area is influencing colors that we see coming over the next year or so. Here are some examples of how those come to life. You know, the bathroom in the bottom right, I do want to point out as something that I think is an interesting use of these colors, but it's also a reference back to one of the other trends that we talked about in this idea of nuanced neutrals. And as we talk about spectrums or being able to place design and colorways on a spectrum of modernism or spectrum of design, it's important to note that even with things like nuanced neutrals, that doesn't have to be boring. If you look at the wall covering and the faucet finish option and the sink that was chosen and even the color of the countertop, I would argue that none of these selections are boring. They fit within the nuanced neutral category. Some of them can fit within the sultry spices category, but they're brought to life in a way that is anything but neutral or boring. And then we'll move into the peacock effect. And the peacock is, I think, a really interesting way to sort of wrap up the conversation about color because it has very saturated blue greens that you see from peacock's tail feathers. And this trend can actually be tied back to a variety of different things. It could be the outdoors and people wanting to bring the outdoors in. It also has to do with travel and experiencing animals or these colors in a variety of different spaces. There's also some really interesting conversations that are happening about propelling these colors into the future as it has to do with royals and the conversation about the colors associated with royalty and majesty that have been happening lately in the world. So it's really interesting to see how a lot of the things that are happening around the world and a lot of the influences that are impacting us as people really tie to the colors and materials that are selected for people's houses. Now, it could be said that everything I just went through with you makes it seem like everything is on trend. And if everything is on trend, is anything? What is on trend? And so I would again sort of wrap up this conversation by going back to what kind of modernist are you? And really making sure that we understand the concept of the spectrum that exists from a design standpoint today, both especially from a color material finish standpoint, to let you know that there is a world of choice out there. And that's a good thing because it allows people to choose and reflect their design style that makes them happy and that gives them calm and comfort and sort of peace and serenity at home. And although it can seem potentially overwhelming when all of these different colors and materials and finishes are on trend, it's a really great thing for you and your businesses because it allows you to do your best work and not be constrained by any perceived rules or things that have to be done from a color, material, or finish standpoint. You really have the gamut to play with. And I think that's an exciting time. Now, with that, I wanted to make sure that we had some time to answer any questions and talk through any of the content that we had here for you today. So, Debbie, I don't know if any questions have been submitted as we've gone through the presentation.
Let me try that again. Hi, Betsy. Are you?
Hi.
Hi, I'm
Yes,
sorry about that. I was
no
muted.
worries.
So yeah, there's been a couple of questions. This has been really interesting, beautiful presentation, lots of color, of course, and the trends were great. So one of the questions that came through, it was a while back,
Okay.
was with men beginning to interact more with kitchens that are
Yes.
typically more feminine, in both the design and use, is it changing the costs on the overall amount spent on projects?
That's a really good question. And I would like to do some more digging on that. We haven't analyzed it from an overall cost perspective. What we have been told, or I guess the correlations that I would make from what we know is that people are choosing to focus on different things overall. So dining rooms are an example of something that you don't see incorporated as often into homes anymore. So costs that could have historically, it's not that people don't need dining, they need tables to sit at, but they might not need a large table for a dining room as well as a large table for the kitchen. They can have one of those, and then those discretionary dollars could go towards other materials for a kitchen, for example. So I would like to look into that more. Debbie, if you could write or shoot me a note with who that came from, I'd be happy to follow up. Just to make sure that I'm answering that question accurately.
Yes, I'd be happy to follow up.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, that's a really great question. Here's another one. How, if at all, do traditionalists relate, fit, etc., to or within the spectrum?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think traditionalists generally would find themselves more on the right side of that spectrum. So I'm actually going to go back one slide, and more in the maximalist, in that there's generally more ornate details and layers that factor into traditional design. Not that that's not prevalent in minimalist. The layers aren't prevalent in minimalist, but there's more details and design elements. And so traditionalists would typically be a little bit more towards maximalists. But we fully understand that there are a lot of traditionalists out there and that they have a very large space on the spectrum.
Okay, great. There's a question here. Are these color trends considered global?
Yeah, they are considered global. We have worked with we have design offices in the US, in London, Paris, and Shanghai, and we have global teams that work in many more countries besides that. And there is a global team that works on putting this together. I will say that our team in India might do a slightly different version of the presentation than I would give here in North America. And some of the insights that we've talked about in particular, I've referenced, I think, when they're North American statistics, but the colors, materials, and finishes are very much global.
Okay, great. I'm looking for more questions if anyone has some. Oh, here's one. The person said they weren't able to listen to the first few minutes. Is there an option to get the full recording? Yes, the answer to that is yes. The recording will be coming tomorrow with the evaluation survey. We do have time for more questions. Okay, here we go. Where do these trends start? Is it getting harder to locate this as global tech spreads the messages? So,
I think if I'm understanding that question correctly, is it about sort of the pace of trends and how fast and how quickly it seems that things can move from one to the next because there's so much ability for people to get them out there? And I think that there's yes, to some extent, there is a very fast-paced nature to trends, but I also think it has to do with how you apply them. And when we talk about trends internally, um, we don't expect to participate in some of those trends that are going to be fleeting and in the market for only, a year or two, more in the fast fashion realm. We have to really take care that any colors, materials, and finishes we offer are going to be relevant for the long haul. And in particular, I think the shortest we would expect something to be able to be relevant in a home from a color, material, and finish perspective is actually about 10 years. So we would expect that something could live for a good 10 years, if not longer. But what I would say about the way that trends can be so easily disseminated over social media, and again, we have more insights that could go into this, but there's what those platforms have allowed is for people to find the trends that are relevant to them. Gone are the days when people only subscribe to a couple of magazines and they only see the images in there as well as what their friends' houses look like, and that's what dictates the trends. People can find the people that they belong to. They can find their tribe, so to speak, whether that tribe exists in the same town as them or in a different country. So more than changing the trends really fast, it just allows people to participate in trends that are right for them instead of having a limited exposure to them, which they might have had in the past.
Wow, that's a great answer to that question, Betsy. And
Thanks.
since you've been talking about that, we've had some other questions come in.
Okay.
So someone's asking, is the green nature vibe only visible among millennials, or are there other generations using the colors related to it as well?
We see other generations using the colors as well. I would say an example, just another group that would be using that are people that we would call empty nesters that maybe are selling their large family homes and looking to downsize a little bit. And indoor outdoor spaces or sort of bringing the outdoors in are something that a lot of those people are interested in as well.
Okay, that's good to know. And then there's someone asking, unlacquered brass, for example, is a particular finish of brass. Are there certain finishes within the brass or bronze category that will be preferred or more desired than others in the future?
Good question. So unlacquered brass is something that is very popular. I would say to some extent it also depends on the functionality associated with the people who are or what the people who are going to be living in a space want. So unlacquered brass is something that is very popular. Um, there is more care and cleaning required with that because it's a living finish. You also are seeing from the brass family, we're seeing sort of an aged brass, which I'd say is a little more gold than the unlacquered brass that is popular and becoming relevant. It's not quite the bright French gold, but it's more in the brass family, just with some more gold mixed in.
Okay, to follow
We
up on
call
that.
it we call it aged brass.
Okay, to follow up on that, someone asked, brass has always had maintenance issues. Is this being addressed by the manufacturers?
It, I would say it depends on, I can't speak for other manufacturers. And then it depends on the type of finish. So unlacquered brass, as I mentioned, is a living finish. So that is something that is going to have different care and cleaning that's required over time versus something that would be what we call a PVD finish or something that has more of the coating over it that it makes it easier to maintain. So I can't give a generic answer because it depends very much on the manufacturer and the finish, but that is definitely something that for the ones that you find, I would recommend asking about so that you understand that going in before recommending it to your clients. And also get from them, one of the conversations that we've heard is beneficial for people to have is just the expectations that a client has when it comes to care and cleaning and making sure they know what they're signing up for.
Okay. So I think you may have touched on this, but someone's asking what kind of lifespan will these trends have? They're saying you don't want to incorporate trends in a couple years that will scream a particular year.
Totally agree with that. And I think Also, where I hesitate, just because of the nuance associated with design, I hesitate to give a very specific answer because it depends on the client, on how long they want to have that space last for. But I can tell you how we approach our different color palettes and then sort of the way that we talk about color as a whole. So if someone as a whole is a little bit nervous about having something be too dated, then things like linens and uh, soft goods in spaces are really good ways of going with more of those things that you could perceive to be trendy versus have some longevity to it. If people are really nervous about big pops of color, put that into a towel. That's a really great way to seem on trend and relevant, and you won't be upset if you change your towel out in 3 years. Um, for our colors, materials, and finishes, we divide them into classics, neutrals, and bolds. And when we are looking at our classics, which would be the whites, biscuits, blacks, chromes, anything in the chrome realm, we would expect those to be relevant in a home for a good 20 years. And honestly, they can last much longer than that. For our neutrals, which would be where a lot of these golds or brasses would fit in, we would expect them to be relevant for about 15 years. 10 to 15 years is how long we would say those can live and exist in a space. And then for some of our bolder colors or bolder patterns, it could be, we recently launched the Shadows collection, which is going to be more, it's bolder in nature. Those we would say for a good 7 to 10 years. So anything that we come out with, we would not expect to ride a short wave. It should be relevant in the market for a good 7 to 10 years on the short end of things.
Okay, great. Yep, so there was a little bit that you touched on about the color trends in the neutral area.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
someone's asking why in some of the magazines they're showing a return to bold colors. I don't know if you know why that might be, but they're asking that question.
Yeah, so I guess I can't answer for the specific magazines. We'd have to ask them about some of the specific projects. But we are hearing in general that people are more confident in going back to color, partially because, and it has to do with the spectrum that I still have on the screen in front of you. One, there's an increase in people just choosing designs and colors that make them happy. Treat yourself is one of the insights that I talked about, and people are not bound to do the same thing that their neighbors are doing, and they're willing to make statements for themselves. And if that means incorporating color, then that's it. But we're also seeing, as people are, more optimistic about, at least over the past couple of years, more optimistic about the economy and things going well, you see more of a use of color and a return to color. So that is definitely something that we're seeing from a few different points. And then, but that's without commenting specifically on the magazine or the image, that would be the couple of reasons why we're seeing it.
Okay. So the imagery that you've shown throughout seems to tailor to more luxury audiences. How do these trends translate to the everyday homeowner?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that they do translate to the everyday homeowner because with the advent of social media platforms, whether it's Instagram or Pinterest, people can find designs and styles that they're inspired by. And throughout here, you've probably seen more material choices that speak to more of that luxury consumer, but there is a version of that that could be available at a variety of price points.
Okay.
Whether it's through the use of paint instead of a stone or different tile selections. But I would say that the ideas are relevant to everyone. It will just be material and product choice that will span the spectrum.
Okay. And so there's a question here about pattern.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like big, bold patterns are back, but you've shown a lot of tone on tones. Are minimalists using smaller scale, tonal, or muted patterns, or are they going for the big and bold?
We're actually seeing pattern use across the board, as you mentioned. And even minimalists are going with bigger patterns, but it's not. So again, if you look at the image, the two images that I have in front of you for minimalist and maximalist, the minimalists aren't necessarily going for the big florals or jungle themes or ornate settings painted on walls. They're going for large scale patterns, but it's going to be more rectilinear in nature. It's going to be repeatable patterns that are in tone on tone colors that add depth and dimension to a space instead of adding the color that you would see on the right side. Does that make sense?
It does to me. Yeah.
Good.
Okay. And then just, I have only like three more questions for you. So
Okay.
since we're talking about maximalist and minimalist, someone was asking, are there certain areas of the country that tend to be more one or the other?
I think historically you would say yes, but with the advent of our visual way of communicating, I think those barriers are being broken down. And I say this with a really funny example that, from my Midwestern roots, Kohler, we're based in Wisconsin, and a designer and a builder that I follow on Instagram. The designer was from LA. She just recently moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and she was sharing some spaces from a custom home builder in Grand Rapids, Michigan that are very contemporary and something you wouldn't normally expect to see in that area. But because people can communicate visually, because you have access to design inspiration from all over the globe, layered with the fact that people are confident in choosing things that make them happy, you're really seeing some of those historic barriers break down of where you typically see modern or typically see traditional design. I think there's some of it in every market. I don't
That's
know if that's the answer that you want, but that's what we're seeing.
I think that was a great example of saying how people are so mobile these days
Yeah,
that it's different and different locations can have pops of this and that in different parts of this country.
yeah.
That's great. And then just two more here and then I'm going to wrap it up. So we're getting back to the metals again.
Okay.
Um, does oxidized silver also have maintenance issues?
Um, Not so our example of it is vintage nickel. And again, I can't speak for any other manufacturers, but I can speak for us, and it's vintage nickel. And I'm going to verify this, but I believe that it is a PVD finish. I'm pulling it up as we're answering this question just to make sure that I'm giving you the most accurate information. And if it is um, a PVD finish, then it would not.
Okay.
I know that the biggest issue that I think people run into is unlacquered brass. And so I just want to make sure. Um, that would not have the same, yes, it would not have the same challenges that an unlacquered brass would have.
Okay, that's good to know. And then the final question, Betsy, is food is a big experience when people travel. Are you
Yeah,
seeing, so how do you think that food is influencing kitchen design? I love this question.
that is a really good question. I think food is influencing kitchen design more in the functionality of the kitchen than in the colors, materials, and finishes necessarily chosen. Um, People want to make sure that their kitchen allows them, if they love to cook, that they have a prep area that's close to a sink, that is easy access to their range and their refrigerator. So it's food is really impacting how people set up their kitchen, but it does definitely impact the materials that people choose and that they choose to use. If you love to cook and you love to entertain and have lots of stuff on your countertops, you're going to make sure that you're choosing a material that is going to resist stains and resist anything soaking into it. But you're still, and at least what we hear from consumers, is you still have the same expectations for a beautiful looking kitchen. Regardless of the functionality or of the inspiration source for people, people want to know that they want their kitchens or bathrooms or spaces to be beautiful and functional.
That's a great answer. Yeah, I think it really is an individual choice. Um, well, that's about all we have for now. I just want to thank you so much. People are writing in here. Great session, fantastic subject, great
Oh,
answers.
good.
And I want to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today, Betsy. And we hope you'll be back again, maybe in August. Um,
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. We really appreciate it.
oh, you're so welcome. And I want to once again want to thank Kohler for generously sponsoring all of our June webinars. And thank all of you out there in the audience for being with us today. Have a great day.
Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Thank you.